It's attorney Ben Pogue versus State Representative William Cogswell in the race for South Carolina House District 110. In this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups, I speak exclusively with State Representative William Cogswell one-on-one. And be sure to download the free Quintin's Close-Ups app in your Apple or Google Play stores. And listen to this interview later on iHeartRadio. Representative William Cogswell, it's so good to see you again.
Great to see you, Quintin.
I appreciate it greatly. Let me take you to October 30th. You said this on the following on your Facebook page. You said this quote, "In just 1 week, I'm asking for your vote so that District 110 can keep our seat at the table in Columbia." You've been there for, I believe, 2 years now.
That's right.
What is it like for you to be in that seat in Columbia representing House District 110?
It's been a real honor. I've really enjoyed it. It's been an education. I don't have to tell you, there's a lot going on in the district, and so it's been a busy time. But I think we're starting to see results, and I'm excited about that.
And let me go on to the rest of the actual paragraph post on Facebook. You said this quote, "The issues we are facing are nonpartisan. However, we must have representation with experience and relationships if we want to bring home funding for our flooding and infrastructure needs." Flooding and infrastructure are big topics around here.
Sure.
What do we need now, particularly in House District 110?
We mainly need money. We know what a lot of the issues are. We know where it floods. We know it does flood. We know it's flooding more than it has in the past, and that's a growing trend. So really what it boils down to is how we're going to pay for these pretty significant infrastructure projects. And, there's two ways to look at it. I mean, you can try and figure out new commissions or new groups, new agencies, and new taxes to pay for this, or you can push for more accountability on the revenue that we do have going to the state, and trying to allocate how and where that money should go in a more business-like manner. I mean, bottom line is, as I've said in the past, the Charleston region provides most of the revenue of the state, and we're not getting much of it back. And so we need to have real advocacy for that up in Columbia, because when you talk about it, my opponent, who was a really nice guy, and I enjoyed getting to know him,
okay.
And that's why I say a lot of these issues are not partisan. They're not. I mean, and I think he even agrees with that. But it really comes down to what's a realistic approach for paying for this stuff. And his answer, which is an interesting concept, but it's setting up a new government agency, and it is trying to set up a new tax. And that is not going to happen in the state of South Carolina. Certainly not in the next year, which is what he's proposed doing, having funding in place by September 1. Quintin, that's one of the challenges I've found being an incumbent, having only been there for 2 years, that you really can't say anything in a campaign, no matter how unrealistic it is. And whereas I've been up there for 2 years, I've learned the system. I've pushed to reform the system because I've been frustrated by it. But the system's still there, and while I'm continuing the reform efforts, we still have to appreciate that in order to realistically get this money back for some of the issues that are really pressing, we need to not go off and on a tangent or try and talk about things that have very, very little chance of ever becoming reality.
And you also said this in the post, quote, "Failing to acknowledge the political realities of our state legislature will set District 110 back. And we can't afford that. I'm well positioned to bring home this funding and will work hard to do just that if reelected on November 6th. What are those political realities right now?
Well, the political realities that we have in Charleston is that Charleston's growing.
Yeah.
Charleston County is growing pretty aggressively, and that's a problem in and of itself because we're not handling that growth appropriately. We're not providing the proper infrastructure. We're not zoning appropriately. So you kind of have this what I've called unbridled growth. It's not organized. And so we have this incredible growth. We have in Columbia a solid red legislature. There's not going to be a blue wave that hits Columbia in November. And so when you look at representation, A, I've been up there for 2 years, and B, while my opponent and I agree on some of the major issues, difference on how to fund them, the reality of it is it's going to be much, much more difficult for him to have a seat at the table than it will be for me being a member of the majority party up there.
And quickly, let me go to October 24th. You said this quote, currently a single legislator from a district with negative economic growth
Sure.
who was voted into office by less than 1% of the state population can stop any and all funding from coming to the Low Country for infrastructure, for education,
Sure.
or for funding. How did that happen?
Well, it happened in 1896 when we passed the new our current Constitution. Basically, our legislature has incredible power, and it's not handling it very responsibly. And yes, you have several members of the legislature. I mean, I couldn't count them on two hands the number that you could make a very strong case, have way more power in terms of funding and where funding goes, policy and what policies are implemented than the governor. And each one of these legislators, are really only answering to their constituents, and if they're a senator or if they're a House member, because they're pretty powerful people on both chambers. Some way more so in the Senate, I will say. They hold a lot of the economic keys to the state, and they're really not answering to the entire state. They're really answering to a very small fraction of the state. And to me, that is very problematic. I mean, there's democracy, and we understand that democracies are not the most efficient form of government. But on the flip side, we have probably the most inefficient democracy in the United States. So I think it's a real problem.
Okay, you talk about that issue. Then the obvious question is this: how do you form relationships to make sure, hey, money is coming here for infrastructure, flooding and education?
Well, again, it is personal connections up there. It is being up there, knowing people, meeting people, being respected by people, and it's not just people in the majority party. It is members of your delegation. It is members of your regional delegation, and it's obviously members of the minority party as well. And I've had the fortune to get to know a lot of the people up there. Again, on both sides of the aisle, have a very good reputation with both Democrats and Republicans. And despite me pushing for some pretty significant reform efforts, still have the respect and support of the leadership, which is pretty rare for a freshman legislator. And I think that the reason why, and I'm not one that is quick to toot his own horn, but I think the reason why is because I take a very informed approach to the positions I take. And I like to study issues and really get into the economics of issues and try and make very informed decisions. And that's appreciated with all that's going on in Columbia.
Decisions. If you are to be reelected, what will you do on day one in your mind?
Well, a couple things I want to do. Into the weeds, I want to push for the a tax, more of the accommodations tax, allowing municipalities to spend it as they see fit, or especially for flooding. The other thing, some other things I would do, I would really push for some of the $177 million surplus that we have from last year's budget to come to Charleston to help with infrastructure and flooding. And then the other initiative that I plan on pushing this year is more transparency on where the revenue comes from in our state, because when you look at our budget that we vote on, you have about 498 pages of expenses, and you have 2 pages that sum up the revenue. And any good business, you would want to know where your income's coming in from and where it's not coming in from, so you can make an informed decision on where to allocate your expenses.
Representative William Cogswell, thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate this.
Yeah, thank you, Quintin.
You're welcome. Anytime.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.